What's up, everybody? This is Fred Richani of TSC News. I have right here via Zoom not one, but two very special guests. They're authors, baseball historians. One of them's even a doctor. We are talking to John Owens and Dr. David J. Fletcher. We're going to talk about the legendary Dick Allen and their brand new book chronicling his legendary career with the White Sox in 1972. Chili Dog MVP, Dick Allen, the 72 White Sox, and a transforming Chicago. Gentlemen, thank you so much for your time. How's everything going?
Very nice that you're interested in the book and giving us a chance to talk about it. And it means a lot to us. So thank you.
Of course. Likewise. Appreciate you guys coming on. But I got to ask, John, you're a well-respected writer, author. David, on your Twitter bio, not only are you a doctor, but it says you're a part-time baseball historian. You're not just that. We'll get to it in a second. It seems like you two, at least on the surface, are an odd couple of sorts, especially when it comes to collaborating on a book like this. How'd you two link up?
Well, I met Dr. Fletcher back in 2004. I used to work for the Chicago Tribune. I worked for their multimedia department, and the Tribune is connected with was connected with Tribune Broadcasting at the time. So I produced a documentary on Chicago baseball for WGN-TV under the auspices of the Tribune. And one of the people that I interviewed was Dr. Fletcher. Dr. Fletcher at that time had a campaign to clear Buck Weaver's name. Buck Weaver, as you know, is one of the 8 Black Sox who was unfairly maligned and lumped in and accused of cheating when he actually didn't. And Doc was heavily involved in trying to clear Buck's name. And we hit it off and worked on some other projects. Dr. Fletcher can tell you better, but he's been a part of an initiative for a couple of decades now called the Chicago Baseball Museum, which is a great initiative to generate interest in Chicago baseball. And Doc, you could probably talk a little bit more about the museum.
Well, John and I hooked up in early part of the last decade, and he did a great documentary on baseball city pastime in Chicago. And so we've had a professional relationship since then, but our biggest project we did before Chili Dog MVP is we did a documentary on Buck O'Neil and black baseball in Chicago that really got good reviews. And it was accepted for the Cooperstown Film Festival. So I presented it in 2010 with Billy Crystal. He was showing 61 film at the time. And so John and I have kept together, and this is kind of a project I wanted to do with him. And I think it really helps for this book that there's a white kid from the suburbs like me, and John's a black kid from the shadows of Comiskey Park, to give the perspective. And I really believe that's the specialness of the book, is our viewpoints coming together and kind of amalgam of the story. And people have really liked that, especially when we've done some of these interviews, is we give these different perspectives. And I think that was really important for the story, because this is a big civil rights story. Dick, until he came to Chicago, was never appreciated. And he found Chicago so welcoming. And he became very close to his white teammates who just beloved him. Obviously, we've got Goose Gossage, his first year in baseball, wrote the forward. I mean, he absolutely his favorite player ever, best player he's ever seen. You got third baseman Bill Milton, and talks about Dick. It's just a special story. And the fact that John and I have come together, it's really been a joy to do.
So how did this concept come about for the book? Obviously, you two are huge fans and historians of the game. But what made you decide at this point, okay, this is the time that we have to tell the Dick Allen story in a way that hasn't been told before?
I had done in 2012 this Dick Allen tribute that the White Sox and came on board. They had really ignored his historical significance to the franchise. So I had worked for years to get Dick to come back to Chicago, finally convinced him to come back. And we had a very special event. He came twice to Chicago in the month of June 2012, and he was beloved. Front page of some of the newspapers about him coming back, and the tribute was really, really successful. We got a lot of the players from that era to come. And so that was sort of the genesis, the 40th anniversary of the 72 team. And so I started working on this book project. It actually started in 2008 when we were working on the Buck O'Neil film. John and I went to Cooperstown that year as part of our research for the Buck O'Neil film, and Goose was getting inducted that year in the Hall of Fame. And so we actually asked a lot of questions to Goose in the press conference beforehand about his time in Chicago. So that was really kind of the spark of the book. But what really pressed it forward was the fact that Dick, in his fact, he'd been passed over for the Hall of Fame. I became very close friends with the family and Dick himself. And he'd get lost by one vote in 2014. He was supposed to be, or another vote was supposed to be in 2020, but that was delayed because of the pandemic. And sadly, he died a day after when the vote was supposed to be in 2020. And so we knew the 50-year anniversary of the team was coming up, 50-year anniversary of his MVP season. Plus, we knew that he was going to be in the Hall of Fame vote this past December. And so all those factors came together to push forward with the book. And John and I started this in October of 2020, and we've gone since then, and been a fun project.
Definitely seems like a labor of love. And one quote that I love that you two have had throughout interviews talking about this book is that he was Michael Jordan before Michael Jordan in Chicago. Can you just kind of elaborate on that for any younger fans that may not understand?
Well, that's Doc's quote, but I mean, it's definitely true. Dick Allen really took the city by storm. He was already a star in the National League with Philadelphia and St. Louis and Los Angeles, the Dodgers. The White Sox, nationally, they have they're the second team in Chicago, second to the Cubs. And to a certain extent in Chicago, they're the second team as well. They weren't for a long time, though. In the 1950s and the 1960s, they were the top team and the most exciting team in town. But their fortunes fell after 1967, and they lost a significant part of their fan base and were threatening to move in 1969, ironically 90 miles north to Milwaukee. And Dick Allen, he really he exploded on the scene here in Chicago when he was traded here in 1972. We had never seen anything like him. He was not the first African American superstar in the city by any means, but he was a unique talent. He was a 5-tool player. He was a must-see TV and appointment viewing at White Sox Park because he was just so incredibly talented. He did everything well, and he did it with a flair. So that's why Doc's quote, he was Michael Jordan before Michael Jordan, just because he just was beyond the norm, especially for White Sox fans who had never experienced a slugger quite like him before.
He energized the fan base like no other person. He took the Cubs off the top of the fold and put the White Sox up there and basically saved the franchise, which was going to leave, brought the fans back. 1970, the team lost 106 games. Within 2 years, they had a 70-game swing of wins. But basically, he was just a charismatic figure. He was cool. He had this persona of just, he had the cigarette in his mouth, the Sports Illustrated cover. And I had that cover up in my bedroom, wall when I was a 17-year-old high school senior getting ready to start pre-med. And I still, in 2022, still had that cover in my bedroom. But at this time, it's signed. But he really reached out to white kids in the suburbs because he was just such a mysterious figure. And that's the best thing I'd say, mysterious, but he also was charismatic. And the big thing was, just like Michael Jordan later on, he was a huge draw on the road. And that was a big thing, is they finally got some national attention because of his heroic home runs and just basically being so special.
Why do you think his tenure with the White Sox didn't last as long as maybe some people think? Because if you read this book, you do some research on him, I mean, it's such a magical season, magical tenure, but it only lasted from 1972 to 1974.
It's unfortunate that it didn't last longer, because this was, when Dick would reminisce about his time in the majors, he would always say that his time in Chicago was the highlight of his career. But he had suffered through injuries through the second half of the 1973 season, and he actually broke his leg during a play where he collided with Mike Epstein in midsummer in 73. And it was hard for him to recover from that injury and other injuries, like the injury they suffered to his hand back when he was in Philadelphia, while pushing his car up a hill, he broke his hand broke through his headlight and severed some tendons in his hand. So he was dealing with a lot of different injuries. And he couldn't perform the way he wanted to perform here the last year of his career, and I think that affected him, and it shortened his time here. He also had some issues with other teammates, most notably Ron Santo, who was acquired in the 1974 season. There was some pushback from Ron Santo. So it was a combination of things that shortened his career here. That said, 1972, 1973, 1974, he still performed despite the injuries at an extremely high level. He was an MVP candidate all 3 years, on the All-Star team all 3 years. It's just that the injuries took its toll, and he didn't really ended up in Philadelphia in 1975 and 1976, and Oakland in 1977. But his career was on the downslide, after his time with the White Sox anyway. So he had due to injuries, his career was shortened, and his White Sox career was his 3 years with the White Sox were the last 3 years that he really performed well as a player anyway.
I'd like to make one quick point on piggyback on what John said. Until he broke his leg in late June of 1973, he was going on to have a repeat MVP season. That was basically that injury devastated the White Sox. They fell out of contention. They also had Ken Hendrickson, who they got for Tom Bradley, who was a center fielder. He was a tremendous hitter. He got hurt. But in June of 73, the White Sox were really favored to win the division. Bill Milton was back from his back surgery in 1972. The fans came out even more than 72. But the injuries were what shortened his career. And I had an opportunity to examine his hand on several occasions after I got to be close to Dick. And I don't know how he ever swung that 40-ounce bat, because his right fourth and fifth fingers from the ulnar nerve was severed, and he had some permanent damage. Just tremendous how he was able to even play.
You're a doctor, obviously. I mean, I'm sure you understand, like, as also a sports fan, how far we've come with nutrition. I would imagine with modern medicine and the technology and nutrition techniques we have today, his career probably could have been prolonged a few years, right?
Oh, for certain. I mean, he definitely had some, I would consider, some poor medical treatment. The doctor who took care of him from the White Sox for the 73 fracture went in the media after the season was over, said he was a malingerer. That's not the most comfortable thing that you hear. You have to remember, he was the highest paid ball player, $225,000 a year that year, and so it hit him in the pocketbook, and he left that last year of a contract on the table when he left the team in September of 74.
That said, he did have a fairly long career. I mean, it was a 15-year career, and for 10 of those years, there was no one better. I mean, his career WAR is 58.7, higher than any of the other veterans who got into the Hall of Fame over him, higher than Tony Oliva, higher than Jim Cott, higher than Gil Hodges. He had a great career, and it was a extensive career where he accomplished nearly everything that he wanted to accomplish, with the exception of he only made the postseason one time with the Phillies, past his peak in 1976.
Why is he not in the Hall of Fame already? Why has it taken so long for him to truly get his due in baseball history?
The reason is because of his relationship with sports writers in Philadelphia. That really set him off, got him a negative rap that he was kind of a crybaby. We have to remember it was a different era. He faced incredible racial issues. The Phillies sent him down to Little Rock in 1963. He was the first black player down there. He came up to the Phillies at the end of that year, and they didn't really, protect him with all the racial strife. And he gets a fight with Frank Thomas in 1965. That's the white Frank Thomas, and it just a cascade of things. And so that negativity surrounded him. And there's the belief he was a bad teammate and he was hard to manage and stuff like that. And he was one of the first players that even before free agency would hold out to get the best deal and stuff like this. And so he was basically way ahead of his time. And so that stigma sort of is stuck with him. Some people hold it against him. He quit the White Sox in September of 74. We talk about that in the book, what really happened. And so that negativity has surrounded him. And so you have to relook at him in the lens of history. I mean, if you look at the stats, they're second to none. As John said, there's an 11-year period from 64 to 74. He had the highest OPS plus of every player in baseball. At 11 years, the best offensive production. Even in 74, even when he left the team in early September, he still won the American League home run crown. So it's recasting the story. And that's one of our goals of our book. And we're fortunate we sold the documentary rights. And so it would be a documentary of the story. And we're just trying to educate people about what special person he was, what a great teammate. He had such baseball innate knowledge. And he was a co-manager to Chuck Tanner. And he did the little things that people don't realize. I mean, he was probably one of the best base runners of all time. And it was so exciting to see him cut the base, especially how he would round third base. I've never seen another baseball player do it. And those are little things, and he would hit to the right side of the field to get a runner over. And he was just extraordinary special. And I was very fortunate, got to be very close to him, which I never expected as a teenager growing up in Chicago. But I think it's going to change. And I think his next time he's up for the vote in 2026, I think our book that John and I have written is going to help retell that story, because it's going to tell how special he was in 1 year, a pinnacle year, the most dominant player in baseball.
Right. That negative, to add on what the doc said, that negativity was entirely generated by the media. His relationship with his teammates were great. He was considered a mentor. We in the book, we talk specifically about his relationship with Hall of Famer Rich Goose Gossage. At first glance, these are two totally dissimilar people, but Goose just idolized Dick and credited him for being a mentor and a guy who taught him how to pitch inside, how to work hitters. And that's not an uncommon story with Dick. This was a common story throughout his career, especially his career with a young team like the White Sox. So the book will look at that reputation that he got, that unfair reputation as being a negative influence, a clubhouse lawyer, a malingerer. And we turn that on its head. And Dick was just an ideal teammate, in addition to being perhaps the greatest player of his generation. For me,
it just seems very bizarre at this point that his family, unfortunately, still has to wait until possibly 2026.
Dick, the other thing, and Doc can talk about this as well, is that he didn't romance the media either. I mean, he didn't really do his part to cozy up to the media. Maybe he could have done that better, but he didn't think that was important. He thought it was important to, play the game and do his try to excel and be a good teammate. And the media was secondary, and that definitely hurt him in the long run.
On a lighter note, though, I love the title of the book, Chili Dog MVP. Of course, there is a story behind the nickname Chili Dog MVP. You wrote about it in the book. Can you tell fans about it that aren't familiar with the story?
John?
Well, sure. Yeah. So Dick, he came to the White Sox. He was traded in late 1971 for Tommy John, another great player who's not in the Hall of Fame. And immediately after a strike that lasted throughout early April, once the strike was over, he was just a force of nature for the White Sox. He immediately started producing, and he played every game up until June 4th, 1972, when the White Sox had a home doubleheader at Comiskey Park against the hated Yankees. So their major rival in the 1950s and 1960s, and the Yankees were sort of on their way down during that time, but would be up again, as you know, in a few years. And Dick played the first game of the doubleheader. And his manager and good friend Chuck Tanner decided to give him a rest in game 2. The owner, another hero for the White Sox, John Owens, stormed into the clubhouse and said, "Why isn't Dick playing in the second game?" And Chuck said, he's been, carrying us through the season, and we need to give him a rest. And so he gave him a rest. And Dick spent his time in the clubhouse, in the whirlpool, just relaxing. And then got out of the whirlpool and enjoyed a chili dog that was prepared by a clubhouse attendant named Jim Riley, and was enjoying his food and not expecting to play. And the White Sox were behind 4-2 in the bottom of the ninth, and Sparky Lyle, the great reliever for the Yankees, was on the mound, and Chuck Tanner said, "We have to have Dick in this situation." So he called Dick, who was still in the midst of eating his chili dog, and the chili dog was dribbling on his jersey. Another bat boy who we talked to named Rory Clark told Dick, "Chuck wants you to come up and face Sparky Lyle in this situation where we've got a couple of men on base." And Dick ran out, still had chili dog juice on his jersey. And proceeded to hit a screaming line drive into the left field stands to win the game for the White Sox 5-4 in front of a crowd of 52,000, one of the largest crowds ever at Old White Sox Park on bat day. And the stadium just exploded. And it was sort of a symbolic game for Dick, and a symbolic game for the season. And hence the name Chili Dog MVP.
We celebrate a signature moment of that year, and it's a legendary story. And we're so fortunate, Fred, is that John and I, we got all the firsthand sources. And in fact, the Chili Dog chef came with me to Orlando for our watch party for Dick. He wanted to be there. It meant a lot to the family. He was there. And so we just, with Rory and Jim Riley and Jim O'Keefe, we had all the inside story was going on, and we were, and you saw our list of interviewers. This is all firsthand accounts, and I think that's what makes the book so special, is that this is not a clip job. This is original interviews. Plus I went to most of those games, and I also have the Jerome Holtzman personal library. He was the dean of the writers in Chicago and the first Major League Baseball historian. So I had incredible files from him, including the pitching coach, Johnny Sain, who is considered probably the best pitching coach of all time. Some people say Mazzoni, the guy from the Braves who learned under Johnny Sain, was better. But Johnny Sain was incredible, and I had his personal papers, and we just had great access, and people just wanted to tell about the special team. And obviously the chili dog moment is just very special. Sort of getting back to the Michael Jordan analogy, it was like winning the game, winning shot when the buzzer goes off. And so we got some pictures of that, and the picture of him actually hitting the home run with his facial expressions say it all. He's dialed in, baby.
Much respect to you two for what you're doing for baseball history, for Dick Allen's story. Definitely incredible. People could check it out. ChiliDogMVP.com, of course, on Amazon as well. Is it all right if I ask you about this Chicago Baseball Museum that you founded?
Sure.
So how'd this all come about for you? I mean, you're a doctor. You're obviously incredibly busy. What made you wake up one day and say, you know what? I want to be the preserver of Chicago baseball history too.
Well, it came out of outgrowth of my Buck Weaver project. I did this protest to Major League Baseball about Buck Weaver in 2003 when the White Sox hosted the All-Star game. And so it was another anniversary because the first one was in 1933 at Comiskey Park. So it just was a natural progression of that project. And I really felt, and John had a lot to do with that, with his film, Baseball City Pastime. And that just kind of crystallized my idea that there needed to be an institution, repository of all the nice, rich history with Chicago. I mean, we were still the only city that's got two charter, American League team and an NL team, and that's unique. And plus, the All-Star game started there. And just, it's we may not have that many trophies as far as championships, but we do pretty well on some fun stories connected to Chicago baseball. So that was what was part of it. And and that's, John and I have, been continuing hooking up, and we got some ideas for some future projects. I got to be very close to some people. One of the characters we've not talked about with the Chili Dog MVP was part of this is the organist, Nancy Faust. And she's a big character in our book, but, she was with the White Sox for 41 years. She invented walk-up music because of Dick Allen with Jesus Christ Superstar. And so we just felt her history and others was so important, even stuff like Disco Demolition that needed to be celebrated. But so that's, kind of how it started. And basically I did it for stress management. It was a way to get, away from the rigors of being a physician.
Of course, everybody can check out the book, Chili Dog MVP, chilidogmvp.com. Before we let you two go, in one line or less, why should people buy Chili Dog MVP?
Well, I mean, it tells a story about not only a team, a charter American League team, but it also tells an interesting story about the city and the area where that team resides, specifically the south side of Chicago. So in addition to telling the story about Dick Allen and about the 1972 White Sox, we'll also tell the story about a changing city, what some people call the most American of big cities, Chicago, and how things were changing in the late 60s and early 70s. And then the White Sox were sort of the center of that transforming Chicago.
If you want to read about a very special player and a very special team in a tumultuous time in the late 60s, early 70s in America, that has still impact 50 years later with this incredible ball player still barred from the Hall of Fame, never getting his due, who saved the franchise. Without this player, there would not be a Chicago White Sox. And that's what we want to tell that story. Chicago is waiting for a hero, and they would be out of the town. The stockyards had closed down a few years before. We talk about that. And this was the last South Side institution. And that Southside institution is still there today because of Dick and this team.
Well said. chilidogmvp.com.